right. Let's see. Camera. Oops. Come on, camera. This should be good, but it could be better. Could always be better. All right. So be it. A little crooked, but that's it. All right. So, yeah. I started a construction company. The way it happened was I had about 2 months that I had to be somewhere in one place for 2 months straight, basically two months, and I had no option to leave because I had to be there, and there were certain things that had to be done then and there, and it took 2 months, and so it was a very difficult experience. It was the most difficult experience I've ever had in my life, for sure, like by a lot. And I was very grateful for it because nothing that would have come of my own free will, because everything is a free will, but this was one of those things that, you can choose to do it, you can choose not to do it, but if you want to do what you're supposed to do, you're going to do it. It was one of those things, but it was not something that I wanted. It just happened, it came up, and that was that. We have an interruption here, maybe not. Anyway, so in that time, it was so difficult that, thoughts would go through my mind whenever there was a chance to reflect, which wasn't a lot, but it happened. Okay, an hour. I need an hour. Okay. Yeah, it wasn't, though that time wasn't a lot, there wasn't much time for that, but, over the course of 2 months, it happened, enough times, frequently enough, to where I'm like, okay, once this is over and done with, I want to totally kind of change direction, in a very like fundamental sense. And what I want to do is learn to do everything, learn to create everything under the sun with these two hands. And so I decided that, okay, I'm going to go to New York State, upstate, and basically settle some land and take it from there. That's it. A very simple thought. It couldn't possibly be any more simple, and it doesn't get any more simple in effect. And so once I got home, I went about, with that plan in mind. I came up to my mom's room and I sat down, and she was there in her bed, just lying down, relaxing, and doing recreation and such, reading and such. And yeah, I told her, and I'm like, what am I going to call? I'm going to start a construction company. What's the name? And then she said, construction. I'm like, okay, okay, how about construcción, which is construction in Spanish, and it's got a little asterisk on the end, so it's very suave, And I'm like, yeah, that's it. That's going to be it. And I told Mom, you're CEO, and Dad's the chief accountant, the CFO. And that's it. I wrote down the name on a napkin, construcción. And and so going about with that kind of as the guide in my mind, I just went about continuing doing what I had already basically done before I had to take off for that time, meaning, get my house in order, take out all the garbage, all the trash, which was piled sky high in every corner of my house. I've owned my house since I was 23 years old, along with my mom and dad, who've owned it when they bought the house when I was 8 years old. And put everything in its place, tidy everything up, and acquire instruments and such for every conceivable use that takes place in the house, and put it in its proper place. I finished that up. It took, I'd already, like I said, already done it. It took about 2 or 3 months, 2 months, and then it took me about another month to finish that. And once it was accomplished, and during that time, I would go out. There's a natural spring on the other corner of town of Eden Prairie, which, people come to get spring water. And, obviously it never closes. It's just a natural feature of the landscape, and it's always there. And they built a brick kind of well and a pipe where the spring water comes out 24/7. And at any time of day, you will find people there getting water, you know. Yeah. So I'd been there already once when I came back to Minnesota in the end of summer. I went there once, and just got a jar of water, and that's it. And then I started going more often, and just meeting the locals, meeting locals of Eden Prairie, local locals, and just general locals, people from the Twin Cities area. I met a number of people like that, just conversation. And then the last time I went, 2 weeks ago, I met a man my age who is a carpenter. And he, his whole like self-formed community is in that line of work, meaning a friend of his is a master concrete worker, another is a master plumber, and there's electricians and mechanics and a whole lot, in his self-made world. And so, yeah, he gave me his email, and I asked him if I could send him an email, and he gave me his email, and he responded immediately, and we started over the course of the last 2 weeks sending emails back and forth. And basically I said, I'll pay you if you let me come along and assist you. I will pay you for what you think is worth your effort to show me the ins and outs of this. And I'm no novice. I've done landscaping I did landscaping for 10 years. I've worked in construction myself, like industrial construction, as well as more residential construction, more small scale. Major demolition of a mall in Flushing, Queens. I participated in that. Worked down there. And I was a machinist, like an industrial machinist as well. So yeah. And basically now the idea that's forming in my mind is that this gentleman, the ball's, it's entirely of one's own volition. If he sees it worth his time, which it may very well not be, because to have someone pay you for the effort that is needed to teach a person who basically knows nothing about the specifics of that line of work, of that trade, to teach him the ins and outs in a condensed time frame. Now we're not talking years, we're talking a day or a week or a month, at most. It's tremendous effort above and beyond which you're putting in, which is already in of itself tremendous effort to finish the job. So, but it's entirely of his own volition. Maybe it's worth it, and maybe it's not. And if it's not, then I want nothing to do with it. Not out of any sense of spite, but because woe on me to encumber anyone in any way. I contacted a number of people that I know in upstate New York who are financially successful. One in the restaurant and food industry, another in the media industry, and I'm integrally a part of that same industry. But this individual is financially capable, in a larger sense than I currently am, and I am financially capable completely and independently. But there's definitely different levels, and he's a level above me, maybe even 2 levels above me. But all 3 of these individuals are, and the third is in the financial industry. And I contacted all of them, letting them know about my idea. And so the financial person responded, and he gave me the ins and outs, in just a brief email, and in two or 3 sentences of going through the process of applying for small business loans from a bank, and that's it. And then I sent a letter through an acquaintance of mine in upstate New York to give to a gentleman whose house I helped to rebuild from within. Meaning insulate the attic, because he bought a new house, and I helped him to insulate the attic and put up drywall throughout the house, because he did all this by himself. He hired a drywall man, who was kind of took the lead on took point on the drywall operation, but basically he did it all by himself with his own two hands, and I assisted him in some aspects of the work. And so I wrote a letter to him, care of this other individual, saying, that, again, this is my idea, and somebody with your general industriousness is invaluable in this, would be invaluable. So basically, first thing I'm saying is that, people today, because of the mechanization and materialization of the spirit, they think they can't think outside of material tools, which are just machines, robots, AI, and human beings have become half human. As my father, who's now retired, says of his time spent, decades spent in the corporate workforce, coming across countless other individuals who he described as that. Anyway, people have become more machine than machine. Human beings have become more AI than AI. So it's extraordinarily difficult to act outside of that. It's not in any way, shape, or form hard to think outside of that. You just have to physically separate yourself from these things and start to do things by hand. Everything you do by hand. Writing a letter with pencil and paper, cooking food on the stove, with actual fire, gas usually, with your own pots and pans that you care for and have kept for a long time, the same implements and dishware and silverware, preparing it by hand, meaning getting it in rough from the store, whether it's a head of cabbage or rice, maybe even baking your own bread, and just chunks of meat, not processed in any way, shape, or form beyond what's needed to deliver it to the business. And that's it. I mean, yeah, that's it. As opposed to texting, being on your phone 24/7 or in front of a screen 24/7, and just buying junk food, whether it's processed food, eating out all the time, or something that's already been doctored in some way. Going to the spring to get water is the perfect example. And because the water from the tap, it's pharmaceuticals. It's poisonous. It's toxic. And so on and so forth. And doing repairs around the house with your own hands and extending that to your vehicle. Now, I'm not a mechanic, so I don't know enough about that to actually open the hood and fix the car. But by living that way, acting that way, I understood all the aspects of my car, of my vehicle. And it's a very kind of a high level utility vehicle, meaning it's not a luxury vehicle. It's just a standard car, but a good car, not a luxury car, but a step below that, at an affordable price. And, so it's Japanese, so it's got all these, widgets and things that you can tune, and basically that extends down to the motor, and so you can drive it in manual instead of just auto. American, all cars everything used to be like that, cars included. Then American products became cheap and expendable and basically just garbage, just made to break, designed to break, on purpose so that you'd have to buy more. And that's why Japan took over our auto industry. So it's a Japanese car, but it could have as well been an American car, either a better American car or an old American car. And so, I learned how to drive in manual and learned to drive manually and thus learned the workings of the gears and the motor through that. And it's as far as I got, as far as all the other fluids and exchanges of energy inside under the hood, I pretty still clueless, but at this point I know enough just through that simple exercise to where I need another 5 minutes. To where basically the brakes squeak But, if I didn't know anything, I'd be like, oh, brakes week, take it into a shop. Yeah, new brake pads, new this, new that, blah, 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 $1,000 or several $100s for nothing, for 5 minutes work, which is basically just at this point, probably just tuning up the engine, the brake fluid. I don't know how to do that, but at this point, I can just Google, because it's very specific now. Google brake fluid, and I don't know what to do. And it'll take me maybe 15 minutes to figure it out, to see it, and another 5 minutes to get it done. And this time comes from a lifetime, 40 years old, a lifetime of doing things just like that, and never in no other way, except for when I was younger and I was, dumb to the mechanisms of corporate mechanization and digitalization. But that period was short-lived, and I was never into any of that. Like, personally, I always hated it and despised it and just wanted to be as far away from it as possible, because it was nothing but nuisance and just a pain in the ass. Nothing but that. Nothing but just a headache. So yeah, I told my old man 5 minutes, so I'm gonna relocate. Scenery is, how about that scenery? Ain't that something? I mean, it's just grand. But Minnesota does not lack of scenery, so we can just as easily find another spot in the house. I covered up the slide door here because it's cold, and this keeps it actually quite insulated quite well. Let's see. Here's my favorite spot in the house because it's the quietest and the most, fundamental. It's deep, and it's the darkest place. It's the deepest place. It's literally in the ground. And here you see my den window. So you're not going to get quite the view, but in person it's very, very, very peaceful and meditative place to be, the most as such in the house. So to finish out what we were saying, we can just turn on the light, and it's just a good view, except this is man-made, which is just as good as anything nature has to offer, because when it's done in congruity with nature. And then when it's not, then it's just the definition of annihilation, self-destruction. All right. So let's see. Blah blah blah. All right. Bear with me. All right. So basically, yeah. The second point now is this gentleman that I met, that I mentioned, construction carpenter guy. If he decides that that it's not in his best interests to take me up on my my proposition, and this is something that's coming about, meaning simultaneously, meaning events in real life taking place and the workings of the within the mind are the same. They're just reflections, interior and external, but it's the same process, across. And so I'm saying this not as a this is if this then that. I'm saying this, that I will just go to upstate New York, having received no communique from any of the individuals mentioned, any further communique, because every single moment in life, these things develop like fractals, like a tree, but there's no trunk. It's just its own development, and every single particle is that as well, and it's boundless. I was talking to my mom last night, and we were just having a conversation, and I said that this is the only purview that man has in his own fate, the only hand that man has to play in his own fate, because everything is arranged, by the divine. And basically, you either recognize that every occurrence is that arrangement, or you don't, right? And so basically, my thinking is that as this continues, every moment presents new worlds, boundless limitless worlds, limitless within the limitless, and 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 that's how it all plays out.